He rode into town for nothing more than a sack of grain and a quiet night's rest, but by sunrise, he would be standing at the edge of a grave, holding the hand of a widow whose past was darker than the storm rolling in. This is not just a love story. It's a reckoning. It's about the moment one decision shatters a lifetime of loneliness. If you believe one encounter can change everything, subscribe now, because stories like this don't just entertain, they stay with you long after the last word. He rode into town at dusk, the sky bruised purple and gold, his horse tired, his coat dusted with the long road's silence, and his mind fixed on grain, just grain, enough to last him and his animals through the coming winter. His name was Eli Mercer, though most folks along the plains only knew him as the quiet rider who kept to himself, a man carved by wind and work, a man who spoke little because life had already said too much to him. The town of Alder Creek sat low and weary between hills, a place that smelled of iron, hay, and old promises, and as Eli crossed its threshold, he felt that subtle pull he had learned to ignore, the sense that something was waiting, watching, measuring him. He dismounted at the general store, nodded to the clerk, and paid for grain without haggling, his hands steady, his eyes distant, because haggling required roots, and roots required staying. Outside, the first drops of rain struck the dirt like soft warnings. The inn was nearly full, so the clerk mentioned a widow at the edge of town who rented a spare room. "Keeps to herself," he said. "Lost her husband last winter." Eli took the directions without comment. He had slept in worse places. He found the house leaning slightly east, paint peeling, a single lantern glowing in the window like a heartbeat refusing to quit. He knocked. When she opened the door, time did something strange. It slowed, stretched, almost sighed. Her name was Clara Hale, and grief had not broken her, it had sharpened her. Her eyes were steady, her posture proud despite the quiet fatigue clinging to her like a second shawl. She looked at him, not afraid, not curious, simply present. "You're here for the room," she said, and it wasn't a question. Inside, the house smelled of soap and wood smoke, of a life kept running by will alone. She showed him the room, simple, clean, and when she turned to leave, Eli felt the unfamiliar urge to speak, to say something unnecessary, but the words stayed buried. That night, rain hammered the roof, and Eli lay awake listening, not to the storm, but to the house, to the silence shaped by two strangers sharing a roof, both pretending they were untouched by the echo of another life. Morning came hard and gray, the rain gone but its promise lingering in the mud. Eli went to fetch his grain, planning to leave before noon, but the town had other ideas. A wagon had overturned near the creek, and he helped right it without being asked, muscle memory guiding him while townsfolk watched with that mix of gratitude and suspicion reserved for drifters. When he returned to Clara's house to settle his bill, he found her in the yard, sleeves rolled up, trying to fix a broken fence. He offered help. She hesitated, then nodded. They worked in silence at first, the kind that wasn't empty but careful, and eventually she spoke. Not about her husband, not yet, but about the land, about how winter had taken more than it should have. Eli listened. He always listened well. Over a shared midday meal, simple bread and stew, she finally mentioned her husband, Thomas, a good man, steady, who had gone out in a storm and never come back. No body was found. Just a horse, riderless. People said accident. Some whispered worse. Clara didn't entertain whispers. "He's gone," she said. "That's the truth. That matters." Eli felt something tighten in his chest, because he recognized that kind of loss, the kind that leaves no ending, only absence. He planned to leave that afternoon, but the creek had flooded, the road impassable. Another night became unavoidable. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Clara asked him where he was headed. He told her the truth, nowhere in particular. She smiled, not kindly, not sadly, but with understanding. Storm clouds gathered again, and with them came men from town, drunk and loud, accusing Clara of owing money her husband had borrowed. Eli stood before he thought, his presence enough to still the room. Words were exchanged, threats made. When the men left, Clara's hands shook for the first time. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Eli replied. And that was the moment, the first twist of fate, when staying became a choice, not a delay. By the third day, the town felt smaller, its secrets louder. Eli learned more than he intended. Thomas Hale hadn't just borrowed money, he had seen something, overheard something involving land deeds and men who preferred silence. Clara had been warned, subtly, repeatedly, to sell her property and leave. She refused. Eli offered to escort her to the county office to sort the debt legally, and on the way, they were followed. Confrontation came not with fists but with fire. Clara's barn burned that night, flames licking the sky like accusations. Eli dragged animals free while Clara stood frozen, the past collapsing in real time. The town blamed accident. Eli didn't. He stayed, helped rebuild, slept on the floor when the room felt too small for what they were becoming. In quiet moments, something else grew: shared glances, unfinished sentences, the comfort of presence without demand. Clara confessed her fear, that anyone close to her ended up gone. Eli confessed his own truth, that he had been running from a grave of his own, a wife lost years ago, a promise he never thought he'd keep again. When the men returned, this time with papers and false claims, Eli exposed what he'd learned: records, witnesses, courage borrowed from a woman who refused to bend. The truth surfaced like a long-held breath. The men left town before dawn. Justice, imperfect but real, settled in. Eli loaded his grain at last. The road was clear. The horse was ready. Clara stood on the porch, hands folded, face composed. No promises were spoken. None were needed. He took 3 steps, then stopped. Life, he realized, wasn't found on the road, it was found in the choosing. He turned back, not with grand declarations, but with simple honesty. "I don't know how to stay," he said. Clara met him halfway. "We'll learn," she replied. Seasons passed. The house straightened. Laughter returned, hesitant at first, then sure. The widow was no longer alone. The writer no longer ran. And years later, when people told the story, they always said the same thing: he rode into town for grain, but left with a life he never knew he was brave enough to claim.